Because after Shabbat in the 3 weeks of mourning from the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, and the spirit of what we learned last week that we're supposed to make balak and tekido, which means we're supposed to turn things around from negativity to positivity to make tzara into tzayhar. So when it comes to time that is dedicated to mourning from the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, first and foremost we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing to build the Beis Hamikdash and to make it built as soon as possible? So in the 3 weeks we have 3 haftarahs. Even though this year there's a Shabbos Rosh Chodesh in the middle of the 3 weeks, but the haftarahs of the 3 weeks are so important that it supersedes Shabbos Rosh Chodesh. So even though it's Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, we're going to learn the haftarah of the 3 weeks next Shabbos. So the 3 haftarahs, the last one is Chazayin, and the last pasuk in Chazayin is Siyain b'mishpat tipada v'shaveh b'tzedakah. Siyain will be redeemed through mishpat, and its captives or its returnees, the 2 different interpretations of the word shaveh, through tzedakah. What does mishpat mean? So mishpat means the law, which is the law of the Torah. And specifically we find in Parshas Vayeshev, when it talks about the dreams of the butler and the baker, so it says that kamishpat harishon, like the original arrangement, Yosef said to the butler that you're going to be, and Pari's birthday is coming in 3 days, and he's going to reconsider your position, and he's going to reinstate you kamishpat harishon as the original arrangement. You were his butler. So that the Aramaic translation of the words kamishpat harishon says ki hilchasa kadmaisa. Ki hilchasa kadmaisa. The word hilchasa means the way things go, halicha, but it also means halacha. Hilchasa is the Aramaic translation for halacha. So mishpat means halacha. So tzion b'mishpat tipada, Zion will be redeemed through mishpat, means through the study of halacha, the study of Torah in general, and especially the study of halacha. And v'shaveh b'tzedakah, through tzedakah is tzedakah, gmilas chasadim, acts of loving kindness, avas Yisrael. So these 2 things, Torah, specifically halacha, and avas Yisrael, are the key to bringing an end to the galus and transforming the galus into gul. In halacha itself, there are halachas that are specifically connected or uniquely connected with this time of year. And that is first and foremost the halachas of the Beis Hamikdash. We're focused on the Beis Hamikdash. We're mourning for the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. So it's appropriate to learn about the Beis Hamikdash, especially since we know that kol ha'osik b'teiras oila kilu hikra b'oila, engaging in the laws of the carbon oila is considered like offering the carbon oila. So engaging in the laws of the Beis Hamikdash is considered like building the Beis Hamikdash. This time, did I give you a copy? Sorry. No. And did I give you? Sorry. Thank you. Only one here. Pleasure. So there's Yecheskel Hanavi his prophecy was during the 70 years of the Babylonian exile. He was in Golus Babylon, the Har Kvar. And it says that Hashem appeared to Yecheskel and he gave him a mission. He took him on he had a malach take him on a tour of the 3rd Beis Hamikdash and measure all the measurements of the Beis Hamikdash, how each section of the Beis Hamikdash, exactly its measurements and all the details. And he told him to give over to the Jewish people the measurements of the Beis Hamikdash. So Yecheskel asked Hashem, what's the point? The Jewish people are in exile. They're in Babylon now. They're not going to be able to build the Beis Hamikdash now anyway. So Hashem said, just because my children are in exile, therefore my house will not, the building of my house will be suspended. In other words, you tell them the measurements, and the fact that they're engaged in the measurements and the structure of the Beis Hamikdash is considered, I will consider it like they're building. So the learning about the Beis Hamikdash is considered like building the Beis Hamikdash, and obviously has an impact on hastening the building of the Beis Hamikdash. Incidentally, in halacha, there are halachas that women are obligated to know, and there are halachas that women are not obligated to know. The mitzvahs that apply to women need to know the halachas for those mitzvahs, right? So does the mitzvah of building the Beis Hamikdash apply to women? So the Rambam says clearly, Hakel chayavim l'sayed l'mameynam uvegufam. When it comes to the building of Beis Hamikdash, everyone has an obligation to help, financially, physically, Kemigdash HaMidbar, like it was in the Midbar, when the Jewish people built the Mishkan in the Midbar. So when the Mishkan was built in the Midbar, so first of all, financially, it says by Yavayu ha'anashim al hanashim that the men came in addition to the women. So the women were the ones who were most enthusiastic about donating for the Mishkan. And also when it came to actually building the Mishkan, it says that those women who are extremely talented were engaged in the weaving of the goat skins and the different things that were necessary for the Mishkan. The women were involved. So the Rambam says that when it comes to the mitzvah of building the Beis Hamikdash, it's an obligation upon everyone, men and women, just like it was in the Midbar when they built the Mishkan. So the mitzvah of binyan Beis Hamikdash, building the Beis Hamikdash, is a mitzvah upon men and women equally. And therefore, to know the halachas of binyan Beis Hamikdash is something which it would appear applies to men and women equally. So where do we find the halachas of the Beis Hamikdash? In the Shulchan Aruch, there's no halachas of the Beis Hamikdash. The Shulchan Aruch only deals with halachas that are pertinent to Zman Hazeh. Halachas that were pertinent in the time of the Beis Hamikdash or will be pertinent in the time of Mashiach, Shulchan Aruch doesn't talk about. But there's one sefer that covers all the halachas of the entire Torah, and that is the Rambam. The Mishnah Torah of the Rambam covers all the halachas of the whole Torah. And including the halachas of the Beis Hamikdash. In fact, there's 14 svarim in the Rambam. One of them is Sefer Avodah, the Sefer of service of Hashem in the Beis Hamikdash. And the first section of Sefer Avodah is Hilchos Beis HaBchira, the laws of the chosen house. The chosen house means the house that Hashem has chosen for his presence to be manifest in, for his presence to dwell in, referring to the Beis Hamikdash. The section of Hilchos Beis HaBchira has many chapters. I've chosen a small excerpt from chapter 6, from Perek Vav, Hilchos Beis HaBchira, which talks about the position of the Beis Hamikdash being on the slope of the mountain. Beis Hamikdash is built on the mountain, on the Temple Mount, on Mount Moriah. Mount Moriah is a steep mountain. And the Beis Hamikdash is built on the slope of the mountain. So the Rambam in Perek Vav, Halacha Aleph, which you have in front of you, says, Hamikdash kuloi loy hoya b'misha. The entire Beis Hamikdash was not on a flat plain, wasn't on flat ground. But rather it was on the slope of a mountain. And if you build a building on the slope of the mountain, so obviously it's going to have to be split level. Because as you go higher on the mountain, you have to go up further heights. So the Beis Hamikdash was built on the slope of a mountain. Yes. If you want to follow inside, if you have a Rambam, Hilchos Beis HaBchira, Perek Vav, chapter 6. And if you don't manage to follow inside, I will teach it in such a manner that everybody will be able to follow, even if they don't have the paper in front of them. Thank you for being concerned about people on the Zoom. It's appreciated. The Rambam says as follows: when a person enters the eastern gate of the Temple Mount, so you've entered now into the Temple Mount. So the whole area of the Temple Mount, the person is walking from the eastern gate of the Temple Mount to the eastern gate of the Beis Hamikdash. So it all is going to be on one level. Ad soif hachil, until the end of the chil. The chil is the area, the last 11 amos, just before the wall. The Beis Hamikdash is called the chil. There was a fence called the soirig at the perimeter of the chil. Those 11 amos from the soirig to the wall of the Beis Hamikdash are called the chil. So from when you come into the Temple Mount until you get to the eastern wall of the Beis Hamikdash, you're going on one level. The Olam and Achil as Hamnashim b'shnei miles. But then, in order to go from the Chil into the structure of the Beis Hamikdash, the most eastern section of the Beis Hamikdash is called the Ezras Nashim, the women's court. So to go up from the Temple Mount, from the Chil in the Temple Mount, to go up to the actual structure of the Beis Hamikdash, to go to the women's court, you had to go up 12 steps. because you were on a higher part of the mountain. So in order to get into the next part of the actual structure of the Beis Hamikdash, you couldn't continue to go on flat ground because you weren't going in the same pace as the mountain is going. So there's 12 steps going up from the Chil to the Ezras Nashim. Rum kol ma'ila chatzi amma. The height of every step was half an amma. The shilcha chatzi amma. The depth of every step was half an amma. So if we have 12 steps, each step is half an amma tall. So in total, we went up 6 ammas from the surface of the Chil to the floor of the Ezras Nashim, 6 ammas. The height of a person is approximately 3 ammas, at least to his shoulders. So 6 ammas is about the height of 2 people, twice the height of a person. So the ascent from the Temple Mount into the women's court of the Beis Hamikdash was 6 ammas, 12 steps, each step half an amma. Then the Rambam continues, and he says, the entire women's court, which is quite a large room, was all on one level. But then to go from the women's court until the Ezras Yisrael, which is the beginning of the actual courtyard of the temple, you had to go up 15 steps. That corresponds to the 15 Shir HaMalos. Malos means steps. So those Shir HaMalos correspond to the 15 steps that you went from the Ezras Nashim to the Ezras Yisrael. Rum kol ma'ila chatzi amma. The height of every step was half an amma. The shilcha chatzi amma, and the depth was half an amma. So going from the Ezras Nashim to the Ezras Yisrael, you went up another 7.5 ammas. So we have now a total of 13.5 ammas that we've got up from when we entered the Beis Hamikdash until we've reached the Ezras Yisrael.
Oh, that was very high.
It's a very tall mountain. So as you're,
how did they manage that?
How did they manage to climb so many steps? How do people manage to climb steps in their house from the one story to the next? They climb up the steps.
Was that for a specific reason?
Well, the simple reason is because that's the way the mountain was structured. But we're going to see that there's a lot more to it. Okay? Then he says in Halacha Gimel, Halach kol Ezras Yisrael b'Shabbat. The entire Ezras Yisrael was on one level. Then to go from the Ezras Yisrael to the Ezras Kayanim, you have to climb up a step, an amma tall. That's a pretty challenging one. So on this step, there was a platform with 3 steps in it. Each one of those steps was half an amma tall and half an amma deep. So if you take the one step that was 1 amma, and you add to it the 3 steps that were each half an amma, that's 2.5. That's 2.5 ammas in total. So we had before 13.5 ammas from the surface of the Harabayis till where we were in the Ezras Yisrael. Add another 2.5 ammas. We're now 16 ammas up from where we started when we entered the Beis Hamikdash. One more halacha. The entire Ezras Kohen, court of the Kohen, and the area of the altar, Mizbeach, and the area between the Mizbeach and the actual vestibule of the structure of the Kodesh itself, of the Kodesh called the Heichal, the inner sanctuary of the Beis Hamikdash. So all that area of the courtyard of the Kohanim, including the area of the altar and including the area between the altar and the Ulam, was all on one level. But to go into the actual sanctuary, the Ulam, the Heichal had 3 parts. Ulam is the vestibule. The Kodesh, that's where the menorah was, and the Shulchan, and the Mizbeach Hazav. That was all in the Kodesh. And then you have the Kodesh HaKadoshim. That was all 3 sections of the Heichal. So to go into the Heichal from the Azara, you had to go up another 12 steps. Rum kol ma'ila chatzi amma v'shulcha chatzi amma. So each step was half an amma tall and half an amma deep. Then the ulam and the rest of the heichal was all on one level. So if we add another 6 ammas to our calculation, we now are 22 ammas higher than the original entrance of the Beis Hamikdash, beginning of the entrance. Yeah, it's probably a few houses, a few floors, because each floor is probably about, let's see, 5 ammas maximum. Yeah, so 22 ammas. We're talking about 4.5 floors.
It says here that the ulam and the Ezras was the same level.
No, ulam ve'ha'heichal kulei b'shabbat. Or you might be reading from before, where it says that the Ezra's Kohanim and the Mizbeach and the Bein Ha'ulam V'la Mizbeach was Kulei B'Shabbat. The area between the Ulam and the Mizbeach was all part of the Ezra's Kohanim. It was all on the same level. So in the Ezra's Kohanim itself, you had the external part of the Ezra's Kohanim before the Mizbeach. Then you had the area of the Mizbeach. And then you had the area between the Mizbeach and the Ulam. And that was all on the same level. But to get into the Ulam, you have to go up 12 steps. To go into the Ulam, to go into the vestibule of the actual inner sanctuary of the Beis HaMikdash, where the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim were, for that you had to go up 12 steps, but the actual building itself was on one level.
So that was at the top of the.
That's at the top of the mountain. So that's 22 amos taller than you were when you entered the Beis HaMikdash from the eastern gate, 22 amos lower.
So why do you have this image that it's all in one level?
Depends how the picture is made.
That's what I'm saying. You get this impression.
When you look at a map that's not a globe, you get the impression that it's all flat, right? So it depends how you make the map. Now,
Respectfully, the front mirror is 30 feet to 20 hours. So 22 is even higher.
yeah, that's a good way of yeah. Now, interesting is that the Para Aduma was prepared not in the Beis HaMikdash and not on the mountain of the Beis HaMikdash, but on the Har HaMishcha. It was made on the Mount of Olives, which was opposite. There's the Temple Mount, and then there's a valley, and then there's the Mount of Olives. The Para Aduma was prepared on the Mount of Olives, and when the Para Aduma was slaughtered, the blood of the Para Aduma needed to be sprinkled towards the Heichal, towards the sanctuary of the Beis HaMikdash. Now the Kohen who is sprinkling the blood of the Para Aduma towards the sanctuary of the Heichal, the entrance of the Heichal, needs to be able to see the entrance of the Heichal. Now the Beis HaMikdash had walls, but because this was a mountain and this was a mountain, this was 22 amos taller than the lower wall of the eastern wall of Beis HaMikdash was made only 20 amos tall, so that the Kohen, when he was preparing the Para Aduma on the Mount of Olives, could see over the wall right into the entrance of the Heichal, from mountain to mountain. That's one of the ramifications of the fact that everything was on a mountain. Okay. Now that we've learned this, we're going to look at it again and ask a few simple questions. First question is, the opening words of the Rambam are, Hamikdash kuloi loy haya b'misha, that the entire Beis Hamikdash was not on a flat piece of ground, Ella, but rather it was on the slope of a mountain. Now, if you wanted to tell me that the Beis Hamikdash was on the slope of a mountain, how would you say it? You would say the Beis Hamikdash was on the slope of a mountain. You wouldn't say the Beis Hamikdash was not on a flat piece of ground, but rather it was on the slope of a mountain. Why does the Rambam scratch his ear this way and not straight? It's puzzling. It seems to imply that for some reason we would have been under the impression that the Beis Hamikdash was on a flat plane. And the Rambam has to come and tell me, no, it was not on a flat plane as you would have assumed, but rather it was on the slope of a mountain. Why would we have assumed that the Beis Hamikdash was on a flat plane? That the Rambam has to tell us, hello, I'll tell you something really going to surprise you. Beis Hamikdash was on the slope of a mountain. Why is that so surprising? And the answer is simple. The answer is, how do we know the mitzvah of building a Beis Hamikdash? So the Rambam teaches us that the pasuk that teaches us to build a Beis Hamikdash is the very familiar pasuk, Ve'asu li migdash v'shachanti b'soicha. Make for me a sanctuary, and I will dwell in their midst. What is this pasuk referring to? This pasuk is referring to the Mishkan, the temporary sanctuary that existed in the desert, tabernacle. And nevertheless, the same pasuk, by extension, is also the mitzvah to build a Beis Hamikdash, which means that the Beis Hamikdash is a grandiose form of a Mishkan. The Mishkan is temporary, the Beis Hamikdash is permanent. Mikdash is miniature, Beis Hamikdash is large. But the principle is the same. In fact, the Rambam points out in the first chapter of Beis HaBchira that every part of the Beis Hamikdash reflects a part of the Mishkan. So in the Mishkan, you had the Oyel Moed, the tent of meeting, right? That structure that had the krashim and covered with the Urias, and in there you had the Heichal and the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Oyel Moed and the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So in the Beis Hamikdash, corresponding to that, you have the Heichal. The Heichal corresponds to the Oyel Moed. The Azara, in the Mishkan, you had the courtyard of the Mishkan, the Chatzar Oyel Moed, the courtyard of the Oyel Moed. That's where the Karbanos were offered, and that's where the Mizbeach stood, that's where the Kiyur stood. So similar in the Beis Hamikdash, you had the Azara, the courtyard of the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash, which was outside of the actual structure, the inner structure, and in the courtyard, that's where the offerings were made, that's where the altar was, that's where the wash basin was, just like the Mishkan. Now, in the Mishkan, around the Chatzar Oyel Moed, around the courtyard of the Oyel Moed, you had kloim, you had curtains that closed off the courtyard of the Oyel Moed. So in the Beis Hamikdash, around the Azara, there was another wall that took the role of the Chatzar Oyel Moed. So everything in the Beis Hamikdash was, instead of temporary, it was permanent. Instead of miniature, it was large. But the principles were the same. So if you ask yourself a question, was the Mishkan on a flat piece of ground, or was it on a slope? Were there any steps in the Mishkan? We learned Parshas Truma, Tetzaveh, Vayakol, Pekudah. Anybody remember steps? No steps. There were steps to go up to the menorah, but there were no steps in the structure of the Mishkan to go from one room to another in Mishkan, one section of the Mishkan to another. You didn't go up any steps. Everything was on flat ground. So if the Beis Hamikdash is meant to be an extension or a representation of the Mishkan in a more permanent, a more grandiose format, then you would expect that the Beis Hamikdash would also be on flat ground. Says the Rambam, I have news for you. Even though you expect the Beis Hamikdash to be on flat ground, just like the Mishkan, I want you to know that was not the case. Hamikdash kuloi loy haya b'mishmer. The Mishkan was the Mikdash was not on a flat piece of ground, but rather ela b'maylei hahar. But rather it was on the slope of a mountain, and continuously you have to go up steps to go from one level of the Beis Hamikdash to another because you are on the slope of a mountain. Why does Taka? Now, the Rambam is not a storybook. The Rambam is a book of halacha. And halacha aleph, Perek Vav halacha aleph is Hamikdash kuloi lo hayim b'mishra b'mayla. That the Beis Hamikdash was not on a flat ground, but rather it was on a slope of a mountain, which seems to be implying that's a halacha that when you build the Beis Hamikdash, you have to build it on the slope of a mountain. It's not they got stuck with a mountain that was steep, and therefore they had to never build it in a little awkward way. The Torah wants the Beis Hamikdash to be built on the slope of a mountain. Why? Why does the Beis Hamikdash need to be built on the slope of a mountain? The answer is very simple. Because everything in the physical dimensions of the Beis Hamikdash represents a spiritual reality. So as you're going from one level of Kedusha to a higher level of Kedusha, there are steps, because you're ascending to a higher level. So when you're going from the Chil to the Ezras Nashim, you have to go up 12 steps that represent 12 levels of ascent of Kedusha. When you're going from the Ezras Nashim to the Ezras Yisrael, you have to go up 15 steps that represent 15 levels of ascent of Kedusha. When you're going from the Ezras Yisrael to the Ezras Kayanim, you have to go up three steps representing three levels of ascent. When you go from the Ezras Kayanim to the Ulam, you go up 12 steps that represent 12 levels. So it was specifically intended to be that way, so that the ascent from level to level within the Beis Hamikdash should be expressed also through physical ascent of steps. Now, if that's the case, why not have steps in the Mishkan? Why shouldn't the Mishkan also be like that? Surely the Mishkan also has various levels, right? We had the Chatzar Mishkan, we had the Oyel Moed. So between going from the Chatzar Mishkan to the Oyel Moed, you should have to go up steps, just like the Beis Hamikdash. Why are there no steps in the Mishkan?
That's complicated.
It would be too complicated. A lot of complicated things in the Mishkan we seem to manage.
It wasn't on a mountain.
But so just like the Beis Hamikdash needed to be on a mountain, could have made the Mishkan should also need to be on a mountain. Right? The Eibishter left over 3 mountains in the Midbar: one for Har Sinai for the Torah, one for Har Hahar for Aaron, and one Har Nagoi for Moshe. If the Mishkan needed a mountain, he could have left us another mountain for the Mishkan. He didn't. So obviously the Mishkan doesn't need to be on a mountain. So the question is, why doesn't the Mishkan need to be on a mountain? Why doesn't the Mishkan need to have steps? The answer is very simple. In the Mishkan, what was holy? There were the Yeriyas, the curtains that made up the roof of the Mishkan. And there were the Krashim, the boards, right? The walls. The roof and the walls. What about the floor? What was the floor of the Mishkan? It was the desert floor, the ground of the desert. And when the Mishkan moved from one place to another, wherever they stuck it, that ground of the desert became the floor of the Mishkan. Right? So the main kedusha in the Mishkan was not in the structure of the terrain, but rather it was in the building, in the ceiling and the walls. So that was the part of the Mishkan that was anointed with the oil of anointment, and was a special kedusha. Now, temporarily, of course, wherever the land on which the Mishkan was set up, of course, was affected temporarily with some element of kedusha, as you see from the fact that in the Parshas it says, from the earth, which is in the floor of the Mishkan, the Kohen should take some of that earth and mix it into the water. So obviously the earth that's right now underneath the structure of the Mishkan has some kind of a strength to it. However, it's only temporarily while the Mishkan is standing there. So when the Mishkan, which is the roof and the walls, happen to be standing on this earth, so this earth has a certain kind. But once it moves away, there's nothing left. You can walk on the place where the Kodesh HaKadoshim stood in the Mishkan. The day that the Mishkan journeyed to the next step, somebody wanted to do a kazatzke on the place where the Kodesh HaKadoshim was yesterday in the Mishkan. No problem. He had no kedusha. Even Har Sinai. Even Har Sinai did not retain any kedusha. Even Har Sinai did not retain any kedusha after the Shechina departed. At the time that the divine presence was manifest on Har Sinai, it had the most intense level of kedusha. Anyone who would touch the mountain would die instantaneously. And then when the shofar was blown, which resembled Siluv Shechina, that the Shechina had departed, everyone could walk on the mountain without a problem. In the Beis Hamikdash, however, it's Hamakoyim Asher Yivchar Hashem. It's the place that Hashem has chosen. So the terrain of the Beis Hamikdash has a special kedusha. It's the place that Hashem has chosen. It was niskadish. It was hallowed, made sacred. And the halacha is that even after the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, makrivin kol afal bisha ein sham bayis, even though the Beis Hamikdash is no longer there, in the place where the Beis Hamikdash stood, makrivin kol hakarbanis afal bisha ein sham bayis. You're allowed to offer all the sacrifices, even when there's no Beis Hamikdash, because the place of the Beis Hamikdash retains the holiness of the Beis Hamikdash. And you can eat Kodesh Kodashim in the place of the Azara, even though there's no Beis Hamikdash. So in the Beis Hamikdash, it's very different from the Mishkan in the sense that the terrain itself was holy. Therefore, when we talk about the holiness of the Beis Hamikdash being reflected in the physical structure of the terrain, then as you go up, it gets holier. Where is that applicable? Where the terrain is holy, where the terrain is part of the equation. But in the Mishkan, where the terrain is not part of the equation, there's no point. So therefore, in the Mishkan, everything was on one level, everything was flat. And the Kedusha was only in the Urias and the Krashim. And in the Urias and the Krashim, the Urias were made from the animal kingdom, and the Krashim were made from the vegetable kingdom, because this was higher and this was lower. But the terrain of the Mishkan, it wasn't part of the equation. While in the Beis Hamikdash, since the actual place where the Beis Hamikdash was built, the floor of the Beis Hamikdash was part of the holiness of the Beis Hamikdash. First of all, the floor itself was made with stone, and even the place that the Beis Hamikdash stood was a place of holiness. It's the place where Hashem has chosen. So therefore, the physical structure of the mountain on which the Beis Hamikdash stood was structured in such a manner that as you went further into the Beis Hamikdash, you went higher and higher, and there was a whole system of how many steps you went up at each point in ascending in the Beis Hamikdash. Now, if this is the case, you ask yourself a simple question. At which point in the Beis Hamikdash do you expect to have the maximum amount of steps? We have various junctures in the Beis Hamikdash, going from the Harabayis into the Ezra's Nashim, from Ezra's Nashim into Ezra's Yisrael, into Ezra's Kohanim, into the Ulam, right? And then you have the Kedesh HaKadoshim. Where would you expect to have the maximum amount of steps if the steps are representing a spiritual ascent? By the Kedesh HaKadoshim. You would expect that going in from the Kedesh into the Kedesh HaKadoshim, you would have like in King's Cross, a massive amount of steps.
The escalator.
Yeah, like the escalators in King's Cross. And what happens? Hopefully they're working right. What happened in Lepoil? Lepoil, what happened is that the Rambam says that from inside the ulam and the heichal was kulei b'shav. It was all on one level. There was not even one step going up into the Kodesh HaKadosh. So according to what we're saying now, that this is the highest level of Kedusha is the Kodesh HaKadoshim, so surely the greatest amount of steps should have been going from the Kodesh into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Yes, to get to the Kodesh, there were a lot of steps. To get to the Ulam, there were a lot of steps. So once you were in the building of the Ulam and the Kodesh HaKadoshim, between those levels of Kedusha, there were no steps. So if the steps represent an ascent in intensity of holiness, then surely going into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, you should have had the maximum amount of steps. And the answer is very simple. What's the Kodesh HaKadoshim? Kodesh HaKadoshim is the place where the infinite essence of Hashem is manifest. Right? Infinity. As we know, we talked about this many times in this year, the Makim Ha'arein, in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, there was a continuous miracle that expressed itself on a regular basis. That Makim Ha'arein Einam and Amidah, that the space of the Arein, the ark, did not take up any space. In other words, the ark was 2.5 amos wide, and it was right in the middle of the room. From one wall of the room to the ark, to the Aron was 10 amos. From the other wall of the room to the Aron was 10 amos. The Aron itself was 2.5 amos. And from one wall to the other was 20 amos. Mathematically, that doesn't work. 10 and 2.5 is 22.5, not 20. And the reason why it worked out to 20 was because the space of the Aron didn't take up any space. Now, we know there's a lot of things in this world that don't take up space. Ideas don't take up space, feelings don't take up space, angels don't take up space, souls don't take up space. And there are things in the world that do take up space, like tables, chairs, walls, buildings, they all take up space. People, they all take up space. Can something take up space and not take up space simultaneously? It measures 2.5 amos wide, but it doesn't take up any space in the room. That doesn't make any sense. It's a fusion of two opposites. So basically, there is finitude, which is represented by taking up space. And there's infinitude, which is represented by not taking up space. But the infinite essence of Hashem transcends the divide between finitude and infinitude. So to go up to such a place in which the infinite essence of Hashem is manifest, how many steps would you need to make between the Kodesh HaKadoshim between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim to truly reflect this ascent? 100 steps? 1,000 steps? 100,000 steps? 1,000,000 steps? 1,000,000,000 steps? It's not going to do the trick. You need infinite, yeah? In the physical world, you can't build infinite steps. So how do you express it? You express it by not building any steps.
Are we talking constantly about neshama?
We're talking about physical steps that are a reflection of a spiritual ascent.
So it's like when you die,
we talk about the neshama going higher, it doesn't climb on an escalator. It means in a higher realm of existence.
Yes.
Right. So the physical steps in the Beis Hamikdash represented that as you were climbing the steps, you were entering into a higher realm of existence. Yeah. But in the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim, you need an infinite amount of steps to express that ascent. Right? So what do we do instead? Kulei b'shav. Everything is flat. What does that represent? So the thing is like this. To become receptive to a greater revelation of godliness, one has to become receptive to a greater intensity of revelation of godliness. You have to become more refined, more elevated, to rise to a higher level, right? To become in touch with the infinite essence of Hashem, what's the key? Become more elevated, become more refined. Not going to get you any closer. There's only one key to be able to connect to the infinite essence of Hashem. And that is, the magic word is bitul, self-nullification. When it's not you anymore, it's only Hashem, that's the key to connecting to the infinite essence of Hashem. So when you go from the Heichel into the Kodesh, don't try to climb steps. Not going to get you anywhere. Kulei b'shava, flat. Flatten yourself out your head, your shoulders, your heart, your legs. It's all the same. You get rid of your ego completely. So entering into the Kodesh HaKodashim is not by going up steps, it's by nullifying yourself. And therefore, there's no steps going into the Kodesh HaKodashim. Now, to appreciate this on a slightly, on somewhat of a higher level, we can ask another question. And that is, if you look carefully at the words of the Rambam, there was something very peculiar about the way the Rambam described the whole situation. If you wanted to describe the architecture, the measurements of a building, how would you describe it? You would say from this wall to this wall is so many feet or so many meters. From the floor to the ceiling is so many meters. Yeah. The Rambam has a strange way of saying it. He says, Kisha Adam Nichnas. He creates a fictitious person. Yeah, and he says, when a man enters into the Shar Mizrachi, the Harabayis, into the eastern gate of the Harabayis, he walks through the whole hill on flat ground, and then he ascends from the hill to the Ezras Nashim in 12 steps. He climbs up 12 steps, then he walks straight ahead, and then he climbs. Why does he do that? Why does he create this fictitious person and take him for a trip through the Beis Hamikdash? Why doesn't he just say, this is the measurement? So obviously he's trying to tell us that these measurements are not just plain measurements. The person who is entering into the Beis Hamikdash and is experiencing going from one level of Beis Hamikdash to the other is ascending. He's reaching a higher level of consciousness, a higher level of awareness of godliness as he's progressing from section to section in Beis Hamikdash. And therefore, when he gets to the Kodesh HaKodashim, how does he enter into the Kodesh HaKodashim? Not by climbing steps, not by getting a greater awareness or a greater sensitivity or a greater consciousness, but rather, as I said before, by being mevatel himself, by nullifying himself. There's only Hashem, and that's it. That's the key to enter into the Kodesh HaKodashim. Sure. Only a bit controversial.
As you're describing this, I can see in my mind modern technology where you can see them taking an image of taking a person through it these days.
Taking the person what?
Through it.
Yeah, in other words, but like the modern technology.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming.
That's what I say.
So you're saying that Rambam was 850 years ahead of his time. Anyway, but you get the point. Yes, I'm sorry.
This question. Someone came to this and really feel this condition going up the stairs.
Right. As you went to a higher level of Beis Hamikdash, you felt the kedusha more.
So did it make an effort, especially, or the condition came on him?
Okay, the question that's being asked for the benefit of the people listening on the Zoom is when a person went from level to level in the Beis Hamikdash, did it come upon him automatically, or did he make an effort to become elevated and become more sensitive? And I believe, like in many other areas of Yiddishkeit, it's a combination. There is, what happens with Shabbos? On Shabbos, every Yid feels more uplifted. Does that happen automatically, or does it take an effort? When you ben shlicht, when you make kiddush, when you daven Friday night davening, you make an effort to enter into a higher state of kedusha. The answer is both. Shabbos is mekadsha v'kaima. Shabbos has automatically. We don't say mekadosh Yisrael v'hashabbos. We don't need Yidden to make Shabbos holy. Mekadosh Shabbos. Shabbos is holy by itself. On the other hand, we say la'aseh says Shabbos, that we need to make Shabbos into Shabbos. In other words, whatever Shabbos is, we need to contribute to it and intensify it. The same thing I believe is true with coming into the Beis Hamikdash. There's a certain automatic feeling that you got when you walked into the Beis Hamikdash. You were overwhelmed by the sanctity. But if you focus on absorbing that sanctity and internalizing it, it's surely going to be a much more meaningful experience. And the same could be said about any mitzvah. Lighting candles out of Shabbos, an incredible mitzvah, and it brings light into the world, and it brings sanctity into yourself, into the world, and everything else. But if at the time of lighting candles, a woman prepares herself properly, gives tzedakah beforehand, and thinks about what it means to bring in Shabbos, and thinks about the Eibishter and the Eibishter's holiness, and the light, spiritual luminescence, and everything else, it definitely has more of an effect on her consciousness.
What is it? So it was obvious that it has it was written because there's so much tradition. That makes sense. It's impossible to go further.
So let's take that. I'm going to take your question, and this question about that when you came to the Kedush HaKadoshim, there was so much Kedusha there, you couldn't help yourself from being buckled, she's saying. So the point I want to make is like this. We all know, the Pasuk says, sorry, there was a question there? No. The Pasuk says, V'asuli migdash v'shachanti b'soicha, make for me a sanctuary, and I will dwell in their midst. And our sages say, it doesn't say I will dwell in its midst, but rather it says I will dwell in their midst. Hashem says, make for me a sanctuary, and I will dwell in the midst of every Jew and Jewess. So in the heart and soul of every Jew, there is a sanctuary. And the Almighty dwells in that sanctuary. So everything that we learn about the sanctuary in Jerusalem also applies to the sanctuary that there is in the heart and soul of every Jew. So obviously in the sanctuary that there is in the heart and soul of every Jew, there's various levels. And there are steps that go up from level to level. And then you get to the Kedush HaKadoshim within the soul and heart of every Jew. And there's something unique about the Kedush HaKadoshim which is different from the rest of the sanctuary. The whole rest of the sanctuary is structured with steps. The Kedush HaKadoshim, you have to go in flat. So what does that mean? So talking about the sanctuary that exists in the heart and soul of every Jew, so in this shiur, people are familiar with the concept. The Medrash says that the neshama has 5 names. Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, and Yechida. And we learned, in Chassidus, we explained that it's not just 5 names, synonyms, it's 5 levels of the soul, and 5 functions of the soul, 5 ways that the soul connects with Hashem. The most basic level is nefesh. That is a connection which is achieved through action. Whenever I teach this, I say that I give a shiur, Tanya shiur for ladies. One of the ladies in the shiur once told me, the best way to remember is the 5 vowels of the English alphabet. Mr. Safran, does it sound familiar to you? A, E, I, O, and U. Yeah, so nefesh is action, that's A. Ruach is when you develop a relationship with Hashem emotionally, loving Hashem, fearing Hashem. You don't just do the mitzvahs like a robot, but you put your heart and soul in it, your emotional connection. So the E stands for emotion. Neshama is an intellectual appreciation of godliness, intellectual connection. That's the I, intellect. Yeah? Chaya is ratzon shelamayla mitam v'das. That's will which transcends intellect. And the O stands for obstinacy, although it doesn't sound like such a good word. What it means, to be obstinate means this is the way I want it, even if it doesn't make sense, right? So if I have a will to connect to Hashem in a way that is super rational, you can connect that with the O. And then you have the essence of the neshama, the yechida l'yachda. The unity with Hashem, that a Jew is essentially one with Hashem and nothing in the world can separate him. And a Jew will not allow himself to be separated from Hashem under any circumstance. He says, it's just something I can't bring myself to do. If somebody puts a gun to his head and says, relinquish your Judaism or I'll shoot you. So I'm sorry, you can shoot me, but I can't relinquish my Judaism. I just can't be severed from God. What can I do? I feel automatically such a oneness with Hashem that under no circumstances can I allow myself to be severed from Him. That's the Yechidah Shebenefesh, Mesiras Nefesh. So each one of these levels, as you're journeying, you're starting off with Nefesh, and you're working your way up to Ruach. Right? You're starting with a basic action connection, and you're developing that into also an emotional connection. You have to climb up a staircase to get to a higher awareness, a higher consciousness, right? A spiritual staircase. And then to go from Ruach to Neshama, from it being an emotional connection to also being an intellectual connection, you're climbing a further staircase. And then to go up to Chaya, which is super rational will, it's even a higher staircase. But Yechida, which is the essence of the connection that a Yid has with Hashem, that's not a higher consciousness. That's not a more developed awareness. That's just the essence of who you are. You have to be mevatel yourself. No, there's no I. There's only Hashem. When you reach the point where there's no I, there's only Hashem. That's where you become in touch with Yechida. So just like in the physical Beis Hamikdash, you have steps going from one level to another, but when you come into the Kedush HaKadoshim, it's all flat. So in the spirit, in the inner sanctuary, within the heart and soul of every Jew, the same principle is true. Now you have levels, staircases throughout the whole process, but when it comes to the Pedish HaKadashim, which is the Yechidah within every Yid, it's B'Shaveh. It's all straight. Yes. I have many things I don't understand. You only have one thing. That's very good.
If one can't, is able to nullify one's own, does that mean that that's it with your neshama, that you will die because you're so, I don't, do you understand?
Okay, yes, I understand the question very well. Basically, what you're asking is that it would seem that nullifying yourself means ceasing to exist, right? And if we cease to exist, then we're not fulfilling God's mission in this world. And the answer to that is, this is something which is a lot of emphasis on it, that nullifying oneself means stopping to exist as an independent entity, and rather one's entire existence is a godly mission. So I continue to exist, and it's a loftier existence, and a better existence, and a more powerful existence, and a more effective existence, but it's not about me. It's about, Reb Shimon Bar Yochai said about himself, Ano simana ba'alma. I'm only a representation. I'm only a representation of the divine. I don't have an agenda of my own. I don't have preferences of my own. I don't have an interest of my own. I'm here only to represent Hashem. So who am I? A servant of Hashem. And when a person reaches that level of consciousness, that his entire existence is Hashem, that's the nullification that we're talking about. And this is something which we are capable of. Because each and every one of us has a neshama. The neshama is a chelik al. And the neshama, as we discussed last week, is the most important component in our being. The body is subservient to the neshama. So as long as the body is claiming attention to itself, and the animal soul is claiming attention to itself and its own agenda, we have a problem. It diminishes us. But once we get the body and the animal soul to take side stage and realize that they're only here to facilitate the agenda of the neshama, which is to make this world a dwelling place for Hashem, that becomes our entire identity. Then that is Yechidah. That's the end game. That's the goal, to be a healthy, functioning person in this world with a healthy body and a healthy soul. And the entire meaning of one's existence is to further Hashem's agenda. Is that?
Well, I understand what you're saying. I'm thinking in the real world.
So the question is, which world is the real world? So the question is, why are you shopping? I tell the story many times, and I'll tell it again. I think it's worth telling again. There was a chassid of the Alter Rebbe called Rabbi Yamin Kletzker. Rabbi Yamin Kletzker was a merchant. He dealt in wholesale lumber. He was a wealthy man. Yeah? And he was a chassid of the Alter Rebbe, a very serious chassid. And one time he was selling a customer lumber, and he was writing out an invoice. So he wrote out the invoice, so many packages of this lumber, and so many packages of this lumber, and then he made a line, and he wrote Sach HaKol, sum total, Ein Oid Milvado. There's nothing else except Hashem. Somebody said, excuse me, Rabbi Yamin, you're in the middle of selling lumber over here. How does Ein Oid Milvado come in? He said, I'm sorry, sometimes in the middle of Shema, my mind wanders to lumber, right? Nobody's surprised. In the middle of lumber, my mind wandered to Ein Oid Milvado. Not so terrible. Yeah. So the Rebbe asks, why was it only the sum total which was Ein Oid Milvado? Why didn't his mind wander when it came to the individual sums? The individual sums could also have been Ein Oid Milvado. The individual sums were lumber, and the Sach HaKol, the sum total, was Ein Oid Milvado. What is the significance of it? So he explains very simply. When you're engaged in a specific act in life, you have to be focused, and you have to know what you're doing, and make sure you get it right. Right? So if you're cooking a chicken soup for Shabbos, yeah, and you don't know whether you put in salt, or you didn't put in salt, you put in pepper, you didn't put in pepper, your soup's not going to come out for Shabbos the way Shabbos is supposed to be. So you need to be focused on what you're doing, right? But at the same time, when you're going shopping, you have to know, did you buy the thing already? Did you not buy? Did you pay? Did you not pay? Is it returnable? Is it not returnable? You have to know all these things. You can't just be in the world of Ein Oid Milvado and everything just happens by itself. You have to be focused. However, when it comes to the sum total, what's the sum total of everything I'm doing? Why am I going shopping? Why am I exercising? Why am I studying? Why am I engaging in business? Why am I eating? Why am I sleeping? Why am I cleaning the house? What's the purpose of it all? What's the sachar? What's the sum total of it? So the sum total you have to know is ain't oid milvado. There's nothing else except Hashem. So one is not a contradiction to the other. They're just the opposite. One enhances the other. Because the reason why you need to be focused on all the details is because of ain't oid milvado. Because there's nothing else except Hashem, and the only reason you're here is to serve Hashem, and it's necessary to serve Hashem properly with all the details, getting all the details right. That's why when I'm focused, when I'm doing what I'm doing, I need to be focused on what I'm doing. Not because it's good for me, not because it's going to make me popular, or it's going to make me healthy, wealthy, whatever it is. It's because this is what Hashem wants from me. This is what Hashem sent me to this world for. So that as long as I remember that the Sachar Koil is Ein Od Milvado, the sum total is Ein Od Milvado, then I'm on the right page. Does that answer your question? Yeah, it's not meant to be easy. Who said it's meant to be easy? But it's very special. It's very meaningful. When yes, sorry.
One get the special when together.
We have siyata d'shmaya all the time, and the more one puts in an effort to serve Hashem properly, the greater the siyata d'shmaya.
So the mitzvah is not something which comes the next drop, something extra that Hashem gives us.
The person has to put his effort in, and Hashem gives us his assistance.
So it's all the way. It's not.
And every step of the way, Hashem is always with us, and He gives us bechira chavshes. He gives us free choice to make the right decisions, and He encourages us and helps us and pushes us along in our decisions. Habal with tahir, when it comes to purify himself, the sayyinese, he's given assistance from that. And Chazal and it's pointed out in the Svarim, it doesn't say Habal li tahir when it comes to be purified, but Habal li tahir means when it comes to purify. It means he comes also to purify others. So that you get an extra measure of divine assistance when you try to help another.
So what you're saying is, am I lighting candles because as a Jew, that's what I do, my mother did it and what? Or am I lighting candles, bringing Shabbos as it should be?
You're lighting candles to bring in Shabbos as it should be and as Hashem wants that you should. And that's why your mother did it, and that's why your grandmother did it, and that's why your great-grandmother did it. Because they all were devoted, as they inherited from Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, to be devoted to Hashem in ultimate devotion.
But what happened if they did it, but they didn't bring in Shabbos? It was all like candles and the cake instead of the TV.
So first of all, every individual thing that a Yid does is very, very precious. You do one mitzvah. That's very precious. What's going to happen a minute later? It's another question. We'll deal with that then. There are some people that say, we talked about this on previous occasions as well. Some people say, don't ask me to light Shabbos candles. Don't ask me to put on film, because I don't want to be a hypocrite. I don't want to be a hypocrite. What's a hypocrite? A hypocrite is somebody who does things that it's not really them. Right? So lighting Shabbos candles is not me. As he said, I'm going to turn on the TV afterwards. So what's the point of lighting a Shabbos candle? So the answer to that is very simple. What's a hypocrite? A hypocrite is someone who's doing things that is not them. What is the essence of a Jew? The essence of a Jew is a beautiful, shining neshama that's a part of Hashem from above. So when the Jew is doing a mitzvah, he's expressing exactly who he is. It's not something that he's not hypocritical at all. It's exactly who he is. If it happens that after lighting the Shabbos candles, the Yetzer Hara is going to get the better of you and convince you to turn on the TV, then you're going to be a hypocrite. Because then you're going to be doing what you're not really all about. You're really a Yid. You're really a Shabbos Yid. What are you doing turning on the TV? So then you're being a hypocrite. So if you don't want to be a hypocrite, don't turn on the TV. You're not going to prevent yourself from being a hypocrite by not lighting Shabbos candles, because lighting Shabbos candles is the true you. You follow what I'm saying? So when someone's mother or grandmother lit Shabbos candles without knowing everything that she was getting into, and the lighting of the Shabbos candle was the unique part of her existence that reflected who she really was. And every level of her neshama, whether she was conscious of it or not conscious of it, was participating. You get what I'm saying? So when a Jewish woman lights Shabbos candles, as her mother and grandmother and great-grandmother did, whether they had all the kavanah on a conscious level, only on a subconscious level, but the great-grandmother had a neshama, and the grandmother had a neshama, and the mother had a neshama, and the great-granddaughter has a neshama. And we're all striving to develop that neshama and reveal that neshama in the best of our ability. Nobody's perfect. We're all trying. Reminds me of the story I probably told over many times. There's an organization called Footsteps. It's an organization that was established to help from boys and girls that want to reject their way of life that they were brought up in, and going to find their way in the secular world. And this organization was established to try and many of them don't know the first thing what to do. They don't know where, they're not familiar with very much about the secular world, but they'd like to go there. So this organization is there to help from kids straight from Yiddishkeit. Come on, Islam. That's what it is. Anyway, so they phoned up Rabbi Shmuel Lu, Lubavitch Senior Girls School, and they asked him if they can do an interview with him. So he said, with pleasure. They probably meant they're going to catch him saying things that will prove their point of how narrow the education is in the frum circles and that. So anyway, he said with pleasure. So a fellow came to conduct the interview. So Rabbi Lu said to him, first things first, let's put on film. So he says to Rabbi Lu, and he knows this person is anti-religious. His whole rise and etchery is to uproot Yiddishkeit. He's asking to put on film. So he says to Rabbi Lu, why do you delight in asking people to do things you know they don't want to do? So Rabbi Lu answered him, I'm appealing to the part of you that I know wants to do. Every Yid has a neshama, and that neshama is the part of him that wants to do it. He's trying to smother his neshama. You can only smother it to a certain extent. So I'm not asking you to do something you don't want to do. I'm asking you to do something I'm appealing to the part of you that I know wants to do it. So when you talk about Yidden doing things, especially Yidden that did mitzvahs, and they did the mitzvah, but they didn't fully appreciate consciously what they were doing, that's wonderful. They were doing the mitzvah. The neshama is definitely appreciated and understood the intent, the beauty and the depth of what they were doing. So they deserve all the credit in the world for it. And Hashem rewarded them to have a daughter or a granddaughter or a great-granddaughter that is even more aware and takes it to a further level. And they're sitting in Gan Eden and Sheping Nachas. So that's wonderful. My apologies that we didn't get to Tanya today. Bli Neder will try and make up for it next week. Go right ahead.
About last week's Shiur.
Okay.
The whole week,
It bothered you the whole week.
Yes.
What do you think? Yeah, the question about last week's Shiur that's been bothering her the whole week.
It's when you say about it's the entire pastor. The Israel didn't know. They were just sitting there and they would, they would go and they did not know inside what was happening. So when you said it was set for them to go further, how could they go further in this guy when they did not know what was happening?
Okay, very good question. It's been bothering me as well, the same question. I think, first of all, it's not so straightforward whether they knew or they didn't know. There are different Mefarshim that explain it differently. Second of all, I don't know if the issue is what actually happened in this circumstance. The question is, the Balak represents the whole idea that there are certain forces that are coming to destroy Yiddishkeit, that are coming to undo and ruin everything that's being built, right? And the question is, how do we respond to those forces? How do we relate to them? And the point that we were trying to make is that the way we relate to those forces is by aftalachas. I'm going to do just the opposite. We're going to get stronger and more committed and more dedicated. And this force that's here to eradicate Yiddishkeit is going to ultimately turn into a positive strengthening of Yiddishkeit. And that on every level is true.
So what is not them?
It's not necessarily. It could be and it could not be. Depending. If they would have known, did they know? It doesn't make a difference. We know now, right? So how do we relate to it?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone who wants to take these papers along with them is welcome to take them. If you don't want to take them, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you.
Thank you.